Right, Henny, are we good to go?
We're good to go. And hello, Gordon Schmidt. Go, John, go while we've got you.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining. Sorry about that little glitch. Our administrator's having a few problems this morning. I think he had a late night and he's still hungover from a couple of bottles of wine on Tuesday. Anyway, I'm going to talk about the international diamond business industry, this rather fascinating but quite small business that's dominated by India. And then having done that, I'll show some of the impact of the pandemic and where we're going with that. I'm going to mention some of the women so that we balanced who played a key role in the discovery of some pretty serious diamond mines. And then at the end, look through the doom and gloom of this very old, resilient industry. I just want to also say I'll touch on the industrial or synthetic diamond business. We don't actually realize and tend to avoid it. So we look at the sexy, pretty stones and the jewelry that comes from them. But there's a massive industrial business out there that's much bigger than we all realize. And it provides, and natural diamonds also used, it provides everything from the amazing scalpels that cut open our bodies and knees and help fix our old joints, all the way through to windows and in spacecraft. Okay, so let's get on with the show. That's what I'm going to cover. There's quite a lot to cover. We're running a little bit behind, but we'll catch up. And just starting with some basics, because you'll see some of these numbers, obviously, particularly for the perhaps uninitiated, although I think many of you have been in this business, or some of you have been in this business longer than me. The carat is 0.2 of a gram, so we really are looking, when we come to exploration and mining, for the proverbial needle in a haystack. The carat is also 100 points, and then you'll also see along the way a mention of grainers. There's also a lot of confusing technology, confusing uses of words and sort of numbers in this business. So a grainer is actually 25 points. So 4 grainers are 1 carat. The original weight used by the very old timers, bearing in mind the industry goes back about 2,000 years, was a carob seed, and that had more or less the same weight as a carat as we define it today, as 0.2 of a gram. The diagram on the bottom, I'm not going to dwell on. We all, I think, as geologists know the difference of this amazingly hard mineral, but same composition as things like coal and graphite. And graphite, on one hand, has amazing abilities to smooth things along, whereas diamonds are extremely hard and can cut most things. Just an important point too, and it's one that I think people find many people find confusing. There is no single diamond standard or price for rough diamonds, and for that matter, even for cut and polished, although there are systems in place. So just to get our thinking right, this morning, for example, I got onto the internet at just after 7. It was still, or just before 7. It was 1:51 New York time, and you could see today's gold price as it kicked off in Hong Kong this morning. So when I got this little graph on the right-hand side, gold price was between 1,761 and $1,762 per ounce. And if you look at the table on the left-hand side, again, you'll see that, you know, today you can get into some of these different systems. It's all on the internet. The London Metal Exchange, most of us will know, and you can look up all sorts of commodity prices all the way through to live cattle, coffee, cotton, you name it, you can find it. But you can't find that for diamonds. In the graph on the bottom right-hand side here are the sort of information that Martin Rappaport provides. He's probably one of the most well-known and credible publishers of a price list for colors, for cut and polished. And again, there's an important aspect even to this graph that it's all related again to the quality. So today, if you look at the color of if you go by color, so you start with the D flawless, 8,268, and this is a 1 carat round cut of excellent quality. it's at $8,200 odd, and by the time you get down here to the far right, that whole color spectrum or value spectrum is very different. Okay, so important point, this run of mine concept is what we use for valuation. We talk about typically 10,000 carats to give us a value. And it also, it's numbers like this that I think has been a problem in the diamond business. When you come to particularly evaluating projects or doing feasibility studies, it's important that you get decent run-of-mine values. And I've certainly seen a lot of models where people tweak the values, or they think there's a big diamond population, big stone size, and so they grow the numbers, and when it comes to reality and they start mining many of those deposits, and we've got a few here in our country we could talk about, the values that they've used are inflated, and that has a habit of catching up with you. Okay, then sorry, I just had a little glitch there on my keyboard. Right, to look at the next step in this business, annual diamond production, just what are we looking at in terms of the number or the volume of diamonds produced every year. This table on the left-hand side is a compilation of data from various sources, including mining company publications, Kimberley process and other. I think it's probably slightly inflated, but anyway, last year there were about 142 million carats of diamonds mined. That's 28.4 tons. If we look on the right-hand side, 30% of that in round terms would have been industrial goods, really cheap bought. Indian goods, the very small diamonds that the Indians so successfully cut into little slivers and small stones and make the pave and all of those bling types of jewelry. And the gemstone, or the stuff that really excites us, only makes up about 20% of this market. And it's a classic case of 20% of the yield of that 142 million carats is where 80% of the value lies. And in fact, if you go and look at diamonds of +2 carats, the value almost goes to 90% of the value chain. It's 142 million carats, average dollar per carat, about 90.92. And then if you also look at this rather interesting column, and it's going to become increasingly important in the future, you'll note the average dollar per carat price. Botswana, you'll see $145, Canada 85 and declining, Australia 13, that's really all Argyle. South Africa is still quite decent, Angola decent because a lot of that production is also alluvial. Namibia, all alluvial production, $460 a carat, most now, well, all of it almost is out of the sea. Lesotho with operations, and this will be heavily dependent on the Lakapa and gem diamond mining at Letseng, also a very high dollar value. So those numbers are quite critical, and we'll sort of loop back around to them later. The value of the rough diamonds as they came out of the ground last year, in total about $13 billion, and a relatively small industry. If you go and look at the toilet paper business, and not to demean diamonds, in a city like New York, it's almost as big as that. And then the important one that affects us again is the retail diamond value. In other words, diamonds put into jewelry, and the number for this 2009 production is probably going to equate to about $65 billion. So this is the number, the 65 billion, where all of these diamonds, not all of them, but most of them that you can cut and polish, would have been put into retail jewelry. Okay, let's go to primary sources and where diamonds come from. Many of us, I think in the business, and other geologists will by now know this chart or graph on the left-hand side. It's a typical continent where we find diamonds. So this cross-section, you could imagine, is Southern Africa. And if we take a slice from, say, Alexander Bay or further north across to Mozambique. This is, in very simple terms, how our continent looks. It's got a structure of an iceberg. Most of we have this thick keel or lithosphere stuck below us on this very ancient continent of ours, particularly in the Archean core, from about there to there. And diamonds are formed at great pressure, 150 kilometers down below, 50 kilobars and about 1200 centigrade. Bearing in mind that a tire pressure in a car is only about 2 bars. So it's a considerable pressure and lots of heat, and then the diamonds reside in this keel, which translate, particularly in the case of our ancient continents, this keel mostly translates around with the continents as they move. And the diamonds reside in the keel. They tend to be very old. Dave Apter talked previously about some of these formation of these diamonds and big diamonds. I'll mention just briefly a few localities of big diamonds, but we have diamonds resident in the keel. And the Kimberlites are the passenger trains, which, if they're lucky and intersect a bunch of these diamonds, will bring them to the surface. If they don't, then we will find Kimberlites, and typically we see that in clusters of Kimberlites, where you can have a couple of really world-class mines, but next door there's a Kimberlite that may have a few smatterings of diamonds or almost barren. And there, for example, would be a Kimberlite that's come through sort of the edge of the craton, just missed the diamond stability field and is barren. Over here on the right-hand side are these unusual settings for the Lamproites like Argyle and Ellendale, which tend to be sort of tucked around sort of quasi-mobile belts on the edge of the Kimberley block, and we do find other localities. And then, of course, if we come along and strip off the tops of these cratonic areas or continents, and the same applies in Russia and elsewhere, you end up with secondary deposits. And the diagram on the right-hand side just symbolizes that. So we have old Kimberlites, younger Kimberlites, we have big, in our case, the Vaal and the orange, and they plane off these Kimberlites. The diamonds are transported in, I guess, mass flow and over millions of years. There's also an attritioning process, so anything that's poor quality that's come off the Kimberlites has been progressively upgraded into these very low grade, high quality diamonds that we find in alluvial deposits. And obviously the West Coast, where we all know you find these exceptional gemstone diamonds, mostly a small population, well sorted, but very high dollar per carat value. And typically, if you take the Kimberley pipes, for example, you'll find the Kimberlite grade there was about 100 carats, 100 tons, and the dollar price today was probably about not from the tailings, but the dollar price would have been, say, $150 a carat. By the time you're getting down here, if you take the Middle Orange River, and let's assume some of it came off Cliffy Alphix Kimberlites at Letseng, and go and look at the Hopetown Douglas leg, the grade there is something like 0.3 carats per 100 tons, but the dollar value is $4,000 to $5,000 a carat, depending what the bottom cutoff would be, obviously. So lots of grade, low value here on the left, much higher grade, much lower grade, but high dollar value on the right-hand side. Okay, this is a rather busy diagram, but it has quite an interesting impact if you just look at it, and then we'll go to the following one, which shows rather a different picture in terms of where the mines are. So this very busy slide shows Kimberlites, mines, alluvial deposits all around the world, and there's a pretty reasonable spread across the globe, from Canada. We know there are 2 mines up here in the Lac de Gras area. Brazil in the 1700s became the world's biggest diamond producer before Southern Africa. If you look at Africa, it's an incredibly well endowed continent when it comes to diamonds, Kimberlites and alluvial deposits. Australia and India, and a few other places in the world where there either some diamonds. China, for example, Kimberlites and Liaoning here with diamonds in the north of Beijing there in the middle. And this is the Shandong province where the Mongying kimberlite was, which at one stage I think was mined with bucket and spade. Anyway, and if we go to the next one, this is now the reality. That very busy previous picture translate to this. And worldwide, if you go and do the stats, there have probably been about 21 that I can count world-class diamond mines. In other words, mines that have had, lives of sort of 15, 20 years and more. And probably, I don't know what the total is today, I must go and do it again, about 60 if you add the smaller mines and the projects that have been evaluated and so on. So here we have the Canadian deposits that are currently being mined, but probably also getting to the end of their life. One thing you notice is how well endowed Africa has been and is still, so to speak. And then the other big center of diamond production has been up here in Siberia or Yakutia in the northeast, and I'll take you through there. Not shown on this map are the Kimberlites and the diamond mines of the White Sea, this Arkangelsk area, and I'll also show some pictures there. And then down here in Australia, Argyle will close later this year, and then we have the Ellendale deposits which have been mined on and off for many years, but haven't really made money on a sustainable basis. Okay, just in terms of diamonds themselves, we'll now get into diamonds and just again highlight some of these great variabilities that we see in sizes of stones and quality of stones. These are thermoluminescence slices or polished sections of diamonds studied by various people looking at the growth diamonds. And to stress here, these are small diamonds. No one's really done a lot of detailed work on slices of these big monster diamonds that we're finding more and more of today. So this Picasso diamond, quite a famous one that some of us know Dan Schultz's work on, 2 millimeters across, and effectively reflects, a process where you must have had growth around, say, a nuclei, just possibly, and then you have resorption and you grow more layer, until in this case you had a fairly consistent outer layer of diamond being deposited around this original growth. And many of these diamonds, when you look at them, have some amazing growth features and resorption features as they've grown. Okay, just to carry on with the concept of run-of-mine values and how variable this whole business is and why it makes it quite difficult to evaluate diamonds. I'm just going to walk you through a couple of examples. So this is from this product down here on the bottom left-hand side from Umuji Maya. This is DRC, very small diamonds, very low run of quality, very low quality of stones, run of mine about $18 a carat for this parcel. And in fact, their normal run of mine that we see in the published figures on the long term is much lower than that, probably about $12 today. In DRC, we also find some quite unusual diamonds, these very slightly bigger stones and lots of cubic diamonds. Okay, so that's Umuji Maya. At one stage, it was the world's largest producer of diamonds, but again, also declining in a hurry. Then this parcel in the middle here is, they 8 grainers, so they're 2 caraters. These are diamonds from Marangi in southeastern Zimbabwe. Now, many of you, with people like John and Javalani on the call, you'll probably know this whole history and the deposit better than me, but effectively alluvial diamonds, all very, very radiation damaged. These diamonds are all coated. They have very severe radiation damage. They came out of an alluvial deposit, in fact, probably an old beach in the Mkondo belt, where the setting is about just over 1 billion years. So these diamonds sat in gravels or conglomerates. That whole metamorphic belt obviously got squeezed, lots of heat, and you had hot fluids running around, and radiation damage is the reason you get all these rather large, well-sorted diamonds, but very low value. They are obviously in the center group of diamonds has been acid clean, so you do see better qualities showing through, but the average dollar price here is about $35 per carat, and that's been the case in the long term. Massive deposit. It was a classic rape and escape and plunder of a mobile dollar commodity. The graph on the right is sort of the official figures, so to speak, at its peak in about 2011, 12. They reported here, and this is Kimberley processed something like $700 million of diamonds. It was probably in the peak period, probably at least double or triple that. It wasn't as big as the numbers that some of the correspondents and journalists throw out there. You know, they're huge numbers mentioned, but anyway, this was a very significant deposit, and Zimbabwe saw very little of this real income going back to their state coffers, courtesy of various generals and the Chinese and the Indians and Bob and his merry men. Okay, one of the fascinating deposits, and I was lucky enough to go and see this whole process back in the, not long after the mine got going in the late 90s. So this is Argyle. And it's a fun one to look at, this amazing lamproite deposit in the Kimberley. This here in the left-hand side and this gloved hand is kind of run-of-mine production. It's actually been acid cleaned a little. So the run-of-mine for Argyle was $9 a carat when it was discovered back then. At its peak in 1994, produced 42 million carats per annum. That was about 25% of world production, then of 160 million carats. But in this stuff here, 22 kilograms a day, I actually saw the boxes of this looked like road gravel coming out of the mine. But in there, if you look carefully and you acid cleaned it, you came across these amazing pink stones, which are extremely rare. And I'm sure some of you have followed the Argyle pink tender process. Anyway, those diamonds today, cut and polished, are selling for between $1 and $3 million a carat. So from $9 a carat run of mine to these exceptional prices you achieve for these very rare, very scarce pink stones. So any of you have a box or some of them in your bottom drawer, suggest you hang on to them. The diamonds here are very small. I think that the biggest stone has probably been about 14 carats, and they're very rarely bigger than about 2 carats, and the color comes from plastic deformation and the way light is transmitted through that plastically deformed structure of the diamond. So that gives you the reds and pinks and the purples. And in the early days, when they cut and polished these stones, a lot of them exploded or fractured because they hadn't figured out how they could handle the heat process. And if you had a diamond wheel that got too hot, that tended to cause the diamond to explode. Back when it was discovered, 707 carats per ton, 700 carats per 700 carats per 100 tons. And then with the mine closing, they've been down just below 3 carats a ton, which is still pretty high, but at $9 or $12 a carat, it really doesn't work anymore, particularly underground. And then, of course, at the other extreme, and Dave Apter talked a bit about this, if we then go and look at these exceptional type 2 diamonds, which come out of a good deal of the mines that we have here in Southern Africa, Jwaneng, world-class mine, exceptional diamond population. De Beers never really told us about it, but it produces just the most amazing big stones. So this is Letseng, type 2A here on the left, a pink, 13.3 carats. It's sold in the rough for $8.8 million. So, you know, there you see now the extreme other end of the scale, where your dollar per carat is $661,000. A big chunk of again, type 2 diamond here, and the biggest stone that's come out of Letseng, 910 carats, and sold for $44,000 a carat. So it wasn't quite as good as some of the other stone which Letseng has proved. If we go to Cullinan, again, the sort of normal run of mine average value looks very ordinary, sort of $100 a carat, but then you come across these exceptional white stones, and some of them are here, and blue stones. Cullinan obviously is known for its historical recovery and ongoing recovery of exceptional blue stones. In this case, better than the pink, $747,000 a carat. And then across on the right-hand side, some of the big white chunks, which come out of Cullinan quite regularly. And of course, the priceless one that we all know about, 3,100 carats, the Cullinan stone, most of which now sits in the crown jewels in the Tower of London. Okay, so that's a bit of the background, just to highlight the diversity of diamonds, and you know, the fact when you go exploring, you obviously hope to hit the good ones, but very often you also find the poor ones as well. Right, let's move on to a bit of the history. The whole business started back in India. It was back about 2,000 years, and India is a fascinating place. And effectively still the home of diamonds, because 9 out of every 10 diamonds still get cut and polished either in India or in factories owned by the Indians in places like Vietnam, for example. So India has a long history of, again, exceptional big diamonds, and some of them are shown here. Most of them came out of the Krishna River. It's a fascinating large river system. Again, we did quite a lot of work there. I spent a lot of time in India from 2000 to 2005 and walked quite a lot of the river. Unfortunately, a lot of the gravels are obscured by the rice paddy fields, but nevertheless, this huge river system, very similar in many respects to our Orange River drainage. So you go back into the hinterland, and this big river, the Krishna, has a number of big tributaries, which, for example, would be like the Vaal. And so many of the big diamonds that come out of India, and you can see this list above, they were found in various alluvial mines, coming out of a Proterozoic sedimentary basin back here. So there's the Krishna, there's Hyderabad. It's a fantastic city. Next door to Hyderabad is the Golconda Fort. And Golconda was in its early days under the rule of various Muslim, the Mughals that had come down into India from the north and populated and taken over the country, Mughal empires. And there's the remnants of this very large, beautiful fort where the diamonds were traded and held by the different governors at the time. So it's a fascinating country. There's a little mine owned by the Minerals Development Corporation Company of India, Panar, Wajrakur. It does produce a few carats, nothing of consequence. And then Rio Tinto some years ago discovered the Bunda Kimberlite, also in the state of Madhya Pradesh up here in the north. And that mine, certainly in our situation here, would have been economic in mind, but the bureaucracy and the politics, if we think ours is bad, India's are a lot more complicated. That mine, unfortunately, has never really got off the ground. Okay, let's go to India and why it's there. Well, India, as I said, cuts about 90% of all diamonds, and bearing in mind again that, you know, that 90% is largely small stuff, because, as I said in the earlier diagram, you know, the 20% that has all the value is the bigger stuff, but they do cut that as well. But they certainly cut lots of small diamonds. Surat, up in the northwest of India, is the main center of activity, and prior to the lockdowns, it employed 700,000 people. They're all family businesses, mostly now modernized, and their productivity, precision, and quality is just exceptional. And this blue block here sums up why the rest of the world cannot really compete. And most of us in the business will know that, you know, regularly in this country and other countries around us, there's the argument that we need to cut and polish and beneficiate more. Well, if you want to cut and polish a 1 carat stone in India, it's going to cost you about $10 a carat. In Belgium, it'll cost you about 70. Here in South Africa, it's going to cost you about 120 carats, $120 a carat. And I interestingly just did a exercise for a black gentleman who wants to get into the business and looked into some of the factories and the information, and that's pretty reliable. So that's a real figure, but, you know, you just simply can't compete. The industry, cutting and polishing industry, is also becoming very tech driven. Some of you will have seen this technology. It's similar to a CAT scan image analysis, which we also use in geology. So this is a picture from the Sarin system, which is a well-known one. This is a diamond of reasonable size. You put the diamond into a fancy microscope and you create a 3D image of it, and then you can massage that data to see, you know, what's best. If you can get, say, 3 big stones and a little one like the green one here, or of good quality or top quality, or would you go and cut the stones, you know, directly in half and end up with two big pieces of diamond? And then you can play with the numbers and the dollar per carat and so on and decide what's best for you. And that technology, particularly on the bigger stones, is used very extensively. On the big stones, you still find that there are a few master craftsmen in the world who do the finishing off, and they will shave off little 0.2 of a carat here and a sliver somewhere else and enhance the value. But a great deal of the initial cutting and well, particularly cutting and polishing is obviously done with technology today. So that's India, and then the Indian diamonds effectively ran out. Those alluvial deposits were depleted, and the business switched across to Brazil. And Brazil, again, is a fascinating country when it comes to kimberlites, related sort of alkalic rocks and diamonds, particularly big alluvial diamonds. And again, I mean big. And this diagram on the left shows sort of the typical sort of cratonic structure, although a lot of this country, when they talk about craton, is not really the ancient type cratons that we know, because a great deal of it has been sort of overprinted by, I guess, what we would call beryllium in West Africa, the stuff Adrian will know well for its gold, and in Brazil there's also a lot of gold. But nevertheless, there are that Sao Francisco is probably the best, you know, unaffected craton, so to speak. It has the first real commercial diamond mine. It was set up by a guy Ken Johnson, who some of us will know. He worked in the alluvials around Ventersdorp at one stage, probably 10, 15 years ago. And he's built a small mine here at Bruno, Kimberlite, actually discovered by De Beers. And they walked away from it. It's 2 hectares. I'll show you some of the numbers. So these are all the kimberlites, and still being found. On the right-hand side is the spread of diamonds, which is very extensive around the country, and some very interesting and unusual diamond populations, again, where people talk about lithospheric diamonds. There's lots of carbonados, and then super deep diamonds. People like Steve Haggerty have looked and worked on these stones. Okay, if we go in, next slide, just look at Brazil. This is just a list of a few of these large historic diamonds. I'm going to show you another diagram which shows these have come mostly out of alluvial deposits. And there's a disconnect in Brazil between the presence of kimberlites, lots of indicator minerals, and the extensive spread in diamonds. And when you look at Brazil, and I don't think I'm alone here, there obviously, as Bruno has shown, there are kimberlites with diamonds that might be able to be mined, but a lot of the diamonds, much like India, seem to have come from old kimberlites, and they've been reworked through Proterozoic sedimentary deposits, lots of big sedimentary basins in Brazil. So they've been worked into the Proterozoic and then reworked out of that, and so you end up with the high quality stones which people find. This is the population out of Bruno. It's a really nice product. It averages around $190 a carat.
John, you've gone quiet there on us.
Distance-wise, 9 kilometers. Okay, so it's a little bit further than I thought, but just short of 10 kilometers. But it was an easy drive, and I think this farm, Charleswood, there's some history to this farm, Charleswood. pecan nuts. But it was owned by somebody important out there.
Borrowed from a previous owner.
Borrowed from a previous owner. Yes, yes. Right on the border with Mozambique.
Gordon, are those then now sort of reconcentrated alluvials from the hard rock outcrops?
I'm no diamond person. If you ask me where to find diamonds, I say in a jewelry store. So I went there out of interest. I'd never had any exposure to diamonds at all. The Marangi stuff was rather interesting. We'll go to that in a moment. But this is where they're hauling them out at the moment. I think we walked up in this area as well. Marangi, if my memory serves me correctly, is this area here. Yeah, that looks as though it's been worked. No, that's forest.
Sorry, Gordon, it's Michael here. I was can I also add a little story to the story?
Please come in.
Annie, if you're okay with that.
Fine, please,
I'm actually,
please do that.
I'm actually a geometallurgist and sort of more a process engineer than I'm a geologist, but obviously geology is important to me as well. But I was fortunate and I saw John's little diagram earlier on where he showed that what what do you call it, the Kimberlite process information, which showed a spike in the year 2011, 2012, where they picked up that the most diamonds were produced in that time. Now, I was fortunate to, I'm not going to mention any names because this stuff is probably quite tricky even today. But I did manage to go to probably one of the major producers at the stage in that period, and they wanted us to help them to get the recovery plant fixed up. And I'll never forget the amazing difficulty in the recovery of those stones in their recovery plant due to those coatings that John alluded to. These things, normally you would find that a recovery plant will have its X-ray system and it will recover like 98% of the diamonds. But in this case, these things were so badly coated that the tailings were so highly loaded with diamonds with these coatings that the X-ray machine, that they had a whole bunch of hand sorters on the tailing side. So they would actually hand pick diamonds by shape after going through the X-ray machines from a tailings belt, which is pretty unique, I would think, anyway. That was fascinating.
Just stop.
Sorry, guys. It sounds like we've got Marilyn and John back with us. Thank you very much for keeping the discussion going. Can you hear us, John?
Yeah, I just got to find.
There we've got you. Yes, we've got you. We're going to have to ask Gordon just to stop sharing, and then you can bring in your screen again. There we go. Thanks, Gordon. Okay, can you guys remember now where we left off? Doesn't matter. I've got the computer running. Page 60, John.
Okay, can you see that?
No, we only still you at the moment. We need you just don't need to share your screen.
Get out of your shop.
Green at the bottom.
Okay, getting that.
Okay. There we go.
Sorry about that.
16.
There we go.
Okay, we were into the Russian stuff. Okay, so we discussed Ernie. So these are the Kimberlites in the northeast, and there's and I heard you just talking about diamond recoveries. Well, interestingly, and I'll come to that. We had this amazing trip to Russia as things were opening up in 1990. And this Udachnaya mine there was still very active at that stage. It was their flagship mine. Murney, this one had been mined out as an open pit, and they hadn't yet got to the stage of deciding to take it underground, which they did eventually do. And bearing in mind in those days, and even to some extent today, you know, diamonds are a hard currency. When you sell them, the Russians need that currency. And so they have developed mines, and they certainly did back then, which you certainly wouldn't have developed in the West given the economics. Anyway, so this is Udachnaya. It's now mothballed. Bear in mind that you work there most of the year in minus 20 to 40 degrees centigrade, and man, you know, it's so cold you don't even realize how cold it is. All your plants are clad so that things don't freeze. So, you know, your economics, if it's $20 a ton to mine and process material here in Southern Africa, it's going to cost you 4 or 5 times that $100 a ton in places like this and Canada. So and again, the challenge here is everything's in the permafrost. If you looked at this mine, the actual recovery plant was about 7 kilometers away, because you had to go and find yourself some proper solid rock to build your plant on. The other thing that when we got there in 1990, the mine managers and the plant managers were incredibly proud of the fact that they recovered about 99% of their grade. So they recovered nearly all the diamonds. And when you went and looked at the plant, the Russians were way ahead of us in terms of autogenous milling. So they broke very few diamonds. And they went through the whole process from autogenous milling to froth flotation for small diamonds, electrostatic separation, and they had banks and banks of X-rays. So on the bottom right, there's a handful of diamonds. I couldn't really get decent photographs of the sugar because they recover everything down almost to sugar. But you'll see here, you know, this melee. And that was the stuff, you know, that De Beers bought, and lots of the vaults back in those years were actually full of this melee. But with the Indians, they found a way, much like Argyle, to actually move that fine stuff. So anyway, that's a snapshot on the Siberian operations. I'm not going to go through all. This is the girl, the young girl and her field geologist. It was a commemoration to them that was in the village, or wasn't so little village of Murney when we went there in 1990. The colors in the fall there are just fascinating, and this one looks rather Photoshop, but it's not. It was just the way the sun was setting in the short summer. And below here is a helicopter ride to see some of the alluvial deposits that have weathered off the Kimberlites out in Siberia with a fairly esteemed bunch of gentlemen. There's Nick Sobolev sitting in the back left corner there, Steve Haggerty, who many of us will know, Roger Clement, Bill Griffin, a successful academic, came out of Australia, Barry Hawthorne, who was our boss, and Hans Lucas, who worked for CRA. So that was out in the northwest of Russia, and that trip was fascinating, particularly for me as a young geologist, South African, who'd grown up with the Roegevaar and the commies were coming to get you, and we went there and found these most amazing, you know, ordinary, decent people who lived incredibly hard lives. Okay, then the more recent discoveries of Kimberlites in northwest Russia, Arkangelsk, up in the White Sea area. Fascinating deposits. The early pipes, particularly these at Lomnosova, were discovered in about 1975, and then have subsequently been developed. It's again a difficult mining area, lots of slushy sediments, and interestingly, the group pipe, I worked on it in 1997, and then had a couple of trips back there in 2005. But it was discovered by a Canadian junior, or it was really an extension of the known Kimberlite field. People like Roy Spencer were involved. They lost their rights. De Beers then had a crack at it, and they got nowhere and were told to go and sit in their corner, and then it ended up with Luke Oil, and I did some work for Luke Oil, which was rather interesting. So, and this pipe has on average about 60, 70 meters of cover on it. Again, you know, soft sediment. It's recently been developed by Luke Oil and bought by a Russian private equity firm. But all of this material and the benches here that you see are all in Kimberlite. The Kimberlite's just starting to show down there. The cover was sort of, you know, about 50 to 80 meters of cover and sort of average 66 meters. So there's the Kimberlite, and it's being mined now. I think in our situation, and we know the history of Gopi 25 up in Botswana didn't quite make it because of the depth of cover. Anyway, they made it in Russia. Again, here you can see the plant and all the infrastructure is a little removed from being too close to the pipe, because obviously they're going to have to push back the bench further. And there's quite a fancy sort of drainage system to make sure that they don't impact too much on the permafrost, because obviously on the permafrost, if you put anything heavy on it, it melts the permafrost, so your plant sinks. Very interestingly, this Arkangelsk area, northwest Russia, is starting to show the occurrence of big diamonds. So this is the Vladimir Grib stone, a 222 carat type 2 stone, exceptional stone, and they've recovered 2 more in the relatively short time that they've been mining, and they still haven't done particularly big tonnage. I think the production last year will be about 3.3 million carats. Okay, then let's move closer to home. Botswana, our smaller neighbor at this point, the second largest producer in terms of carats and value. It is the world's richest diamond mine and the world's largest diamond mine. And I'm not going to dwell too much. The northern cluster, Orapa cluster, has had some and still has this exceptional big diamond mine and some smaller, very interesting ones. And Jwaneng, this world's richest diamond mine, sitting down in the south of Botswana. And Jwaneng, if you take the product coming out of Jwaneng compared to most other diamond mines around the world, it's just exceptional. So these are 3 carats out of the mine. They would be cut into sort of half of that. So there's a round polished 1.5 carat. And they don't let on too much, but certainly you're starting to see more of the big stones coming out of the closet, so to speak. De Beers have also built a really fancy XRT, X-ray tomography system. They have 2 of them running at Jwaneng, and they really have become a single particle sorter. So they've taken the technology that was built initially for sort of the trash business and the sorting of other minerals, X-ray tomography, that the XRTs look directly for carbon. They don't look for, or they don't use X-ray fluorescence. In this case, you look for carbon, and you can basically, so their system is designed almost as a single particle sorter. When you go and look at the readout, you'll get the size of the stone, you'll get some color indication, and so on. So very sophisticated piece of equipment, and really works like a dream. The world's largest diamond mine, just quite interesting, 1.5 by 1 kilometers. Mike gave us a great talk on Botswana, but this is just a big snapshot. You can't have a talk on diamonds without talking about Botswana and its exceptional mines. The whole diamond business, of course, for Botswana has been transformational. So back in the 1960s, around about independence, you had 13 kilometers of roads. They've done an amazing job in using the diamond revenues, and you see it in Gaborone, to develop their country. Just interestingly too, us miners tend to get labeled as people who dig holes and make a mess. Quite interesting. There's an aerial photograph, 1.5 by 1. If you go and look at the actual footprint of a world-class big mine like Orapa, you'll see how small the actual footprint is for this massive mine. Game reserve around it, security barrier, but very, very small and very clean. And of course, the great beauty of mining diamonds is you don't you don't use any nasty chemicals, and that of course is a big plus on the environmental side. Okay, let's flip across to Canada. It has been the world's third largest producer. That production is falling quickly, and I think COVID will help sort of bring on the demise of Canada sooner than the Northwest Territories would like. The mines that we know of are Akati up here in the Slave Cratton, Northwest Territories. And then the current operations are Akati and Diavik. Snap Lake was a fisher mine, or a fisher that was dipping. And you know, when you have the expert in the room here of mining fishers, Jimmy will tell you, when you have a fisher that's dipping and diving and going all over the place, it became extremely difficult to mine. So that was, I think, a bit of a vanity project for De Beers. It never worked. And they very quickly closed it. And there have been a few other developments here like Jericho that also didn't work because they just didn't have the numbers to make it work. On the right-hand side, again, the environment you work on, winter temperatures -20 to -40, and it makes life quite challenging. The other thing, most of you, I'm sure lots of you have been to Canada, you know that in the summer everything melts, so it's one big lake. And so you have to do most of your moving of equipment and actual work, like field work, is done in the winter because then everything's frozen and you can work on the frozen surface. So there's a winter road from Yellowknife to the mine area. It's about 350 kilometers. And we'll get there and look at that shortly. If we go and look at Diavik, you'll see there Diavik is right next door to Akati. It was the two mines that have been mined most of the time by Rio Tinto, and Washington more recently acquired what's left of all these mines. Paid hugely, overpaid, paid $1.5 billion for them, and they now sit with a huge debt problem. And I think these mines are going to, as I say, come to the end of their lives shorter or sooner rather than later. You can see here the trouble they had to go to develop these mines because of the winter melt. Everything is underwater, so there was a berm built around the mines before they started. So there's, on the right-hand side, you can see the berm and the two mines that have been developed, the typical winter scenery on the left. And here too is the fun process that you have to go through to get all your supplies from Yellowknife to the mining area. So this is the classic winter road where you pick up pieces of land and then you use the lakes in between to build an ice road that goes all the way. And I'm sure some of you have seen the programs. The first trip I did up here was quite disconcerting. We'd stopped our 4x4 Ford and watch big trucks come by, and you can actually see the cracks in the ice. So when the big vehicles come past, the ice actually cracks and breaks, but it's so cold at -20 or -40, it instantly freezes again, but nevertheless disconcerting. So they transport, you know, big heavy equipment, and I guess either a consequence of global warming or this guy driving too fast, or, you know, start of the winter or end of the winter when the ice is not so thick. Occasionally they have vehicles like this that fall into the ice, and it's quite a process to dig them out. Fortunately, most of those lakes are not too deep. Okay, let's then just move on to diamonds. You know, it's a business, as I say, that's been out there for thousands of years. Where does the value lie? Now, traditionally, when the early diamonds were discovered in Kimberley and De Beers was created, that the traditional colors were whites and yellows. If you look at production from the Kimberley mines going back a long time, and De Beers very successfully drove a business on, you know, making whites into the top whites D, the high value end of it, and then down through to yellows and browns and dark stones, and these were the traditional cuts. Anyway, so if you go and look at the business today, the real value lies in the colored stones, and I've already showed you the sort of prices that these pink diamonds, the Argyle pinks achieve. White stones have held up pretty well, although it's been interesting in recent years, certainly the last 3 years, to see even the white stones, their values tailing off a bit, because I think part of the problem is we're recovering more and more of them, given the technology that's now available. this is just a graph, a long-term graph. It's an index back to 2005 at 100 points, and you'll see how blue diamonds have held their own through thick and thin. There was a bit of a perturbation here in the global financial crash. So pinks have done exceptionally well, really driven by the transparency and the marketing of the Argyle pink tenders. I don't know how many of you have seen the Argyle pink tender books. They're just fascinating. Blue diamonds done extremely well, and yellows, they do okay. They've certainly held, but you'll see here in the GFC, they certainly took a bigger hit than the blues and pinks. Some of the prices that have been achieved and continue to be achieved, a lot of these stones get bought and held for a while as investment stones and then resold. This pink star, 59.6 carats, sold in 2017 on an auction, either Sotheby's or Christie's, for just over it was $71 million. So just pretty staggering figures. And this blue diamond, the blue moon, it's a premier stone, Cullinan stone. I think it was about 20 odd carats. The cut and polished 12.03 sold for $48 million. So that's $4 million a carat. So this is really where the value lies. And as I said at the start, sort of somewhat cynically, if you've got smart pink stones and blue stones and red stones, hang on to them, because these stones will certainly keep appreciating in value. Okay, moving on to the shock horror. Suddenly, surprise, surprise, in 2018, De Beers indicated that they were creating their Lightbox brand of synthetic gems, forgetting, of course, that De Beers had for many years been very successful manufacturing and developing smart technology for making synthetic diamonds, both on the East Rand and Shannon, where they had big manufacturing facilities. So suddenly the whole world is seeing more and more synthetics, and initially it was a case of shock horror. Anyway, I think much like Argyle, which came along with that 40 million carats that got absorbed into the market, we're now seeing an acceptance that synthetic diamonds are here to stay, and that they're not really a threat to the market. In fact, I see them doing exactly what Argyle did previously. They will allow people to buy, young people who love the brands, they will buy cheap diamonds today, and when they get much older, like we saw with Argyle, they will buy much more expensive diamonds. The technology, either high pressure, high temperature. This is how the technology was really developed initially, to make lots and lots of synthetic diamonds. Typically they would be seeded, and you put these little seeds into a high pressure, high temperature press, and you turn up the pressure and the heat, and you make synthetic diamonds. The other way is to use carbon vapor deposition, and this is the technology that is worked or used extensively today to make synthetic gems and synthetic diamonds. This is very much like a microwave chamber. It's just a big chamber under high vacuum, and you blast in a jet of methane gas or gas carrying the carbon, and you precipitate diamond effectively again on an initial very thin wafer of diamond. You can see down here on the bottom right hand side the original little wafer, and you grow bigger wafers of diamond. When that's all been taken out of the chamber, you can cut and polish what you like out of this chunk of diamond. And the technology obviously is getting better and better, so you can make these chunks of diamonds better and clearer, and have far less poor recoveries, which still happens from time to time if the system goes wrong or you lose power. Of course, there's been a lot of debate about how these diamonds marketed and how should they be sold. There's this terminology now of lab-grown diamonds. They don't like the synthetic. Diamond Foundry in 2012 were one of the businesses to kick this off, and Leonardo DiCaprio was very much part of that business, created by 10 high-profile billionaires. I think some of the Microsoft and Facebook guys were also in there. And the big selling point is just diamond, no mining. So the big emphasis is to get away from damaging the environment, forgetting, of course, that you still need the energy. So somewhere behind all of this, there's a big power station giving you the power. these are some of the examples of the companies. I counted up 25 of them recently, but I suspect there are more. And always the big unknown factor would be the Chinese manufacturers. They make millions of carats of synthetic gems. There's a big CVD stone that was put into the market. It actually came out of Russia. It was picked up and sent to the GIA, and it turned out to be a 5.19 carat cut and polished stone made by CVD. And there's technology as well that many of the upmarket jewelers would use just to check diamonds, and you can see the difference between natural stones and synthetic stones. And then more recently, we've seen a 10 carat cut and polished high pressure, high temperature stone, and this one out of Russia. Okay, let's just move on, and sorry, the time's marching on. So the diamond market is really, as I said at the start, it's the retail market. It's where do you sell your diamonds? Well, you know, it's very difficult to actually just sell a loose diamond unless, of course, it's going to be put into jewelry, or unless it's a colored stone. So here we have, and this is just a year or two older. I'm sorry I haven't updated it. That was the retail business, and where the diamonds, or most of the world's diamonds, are sold in 2017. This is diminished a bit, as I said, 65 billion in 2019. But the US has been, and still is, and not quite sure what it's going to look like next year, the biggest purchaser of diamonds and retail jewelry. So the US is the big market. China has shown promise, but it hasn't really achieved the promise it set out to do. The Gulf states in the last few years also been quite flat, obviously impacted by the oil price. And India too, which was starting and has a long history of adornment and wearing diamonds, also taken a bit of a knock, particularly when he clamped down on illegal cash in the system. We've seen some really major frauds, and inflation caught up, and then high interest rates. So most of the world's sort of new markets have been a bit flat, and good old US kept going. And the outlook pre-COVID was actually looking quite good for the industry. Okay, so what happened when in the pandemic, or when COVID-19 came along? Well, it's quite interesting if you go and look at these again are index prices, because we're looking at a whole series of different values of stones, and this is work from Paul Zeminski, who's a really good analyst based out of New York. This was his index of diamonds, and we'd seen, you know, strong growth in China in the period sort of through 2009 after the global financial crash, as the market corrected itself. And things had looked up again through sort of 15, 16, 17, and then we were starting to see a bit of a tail off last year, and this blue line equates to this blue line. He's had to rebase his index, but you can see here in January, and it was almost mid-January, to an absolute day where the diamond market woke up to the fact that the pandemic was out there and the world was starting to shut down, and diamond prices, rough and polished, fell off a cliff. So that's sort of what's happened and where we are, and it's certainly not going to recover anytime quickly in 2020. This is just taking a step further. This is another source of information. So Paul is not out of line, and you can see again in mid-January here, early 2020, here all the indices for these and prices for these different diamonds, and you see from 0.3, 30 pointers through to 3 carats, all went south. Interestingly, it was the smaller diamonds that have held up somewhat better into the early part of the year. So that's on the actual diamond sales side, diamond prices. Very interestingly, if you go and look at the annual production, this is a graph going back to about 2005 of world production. We had a peak sort of in 2006-07, about 177 million carats, and we then had the global financial crash. And look at this curve, and compared to, so this is Paul's data as he had it. This is my data. I think this is how we're going to end up. We're going to see a big fall off in production. So this is when the pandemic came about. The prices dropped. De Beers, to their credit, and Alrosa immediately idled some of their key mines. It's almost unheard of to shut down the two big mines or idle them, care and maintenance them in Botswana. And so this is going to be the outcome, I suspect. Argyle is also going to shut down later this year. Those prices, obviously, in this market will be totally unsustainable, and there are going to be other casualties as well. Liquibong, I think, is probably the first of several others. So this is how we have seen diamond production annual, and this is natural production, progress, and since 2005, 15 years to about 2020. This was Paul's projection. Mine is obviously very different for obvious reasons. If you look back through here, interestingly, this little kick here, which was start of a general improvement in production around the world, I think this little kick was also partly explained by the Marangi goods. It should have actually, if we saw those diamonds, this probably would have been a stronger kick. This growth here was really sort of a number of smaller operations, including Mountain Province or Guachakwo coming online. And then Liquibong has struggled to achieve what it was going to do. Renard never worked out, and other mines also stopped. So we started to see a decline anyway. And in my view, one of the longer term challenges is the fact that if you look at overall diamond production, it's on the way down, regardless of what COVID has done. And we haven't found a new world-class mine since 1991 when Akati was discovered. Marangi, might be considered to have been one of the sort of super new deposits, but sadly most of that production went out the back door. But nevertheless, this steady decline means we geologists, and particularly the youngsters listening out there, you've got to get out there and persuade people to spend more dollars and find some new deposits. Okay, moving on. The interventions and consequences, most of these will be familiar to you, and I've actually mentioned them. Several companies are under severe stress, exacerbated by unsustainable debt. That debt is a real bad thing in times like this. We're going to see bankruptcies and closures. And already in recent years, past 2 years, the number of jewelry businesses that have closed in the US is quite staggering, and most of this seems to be as an impact of internet sales. So the business is changing regardless. One of the real negatives for the business worldwide is the shutdown of international tourism. And I know a number of very stressed the jeweler stores down in the waterfront in Cape Town, Szymanski and people like that, who are really suffering and hurting. And I think a couple of them will disappear as well, because they rely, on day-to-day tourism, particularly the Chinese tourists, to keep those fancy little shops and businesses afloat. This here on the right was just one of the malls, as we saw in this country too, that wasn't seeing any traffic back in March. And there's a jewelry shop here which closed doors, and it's probably closed for good. Okay, just the conclusions, and specifically talking to the pandemic, all facets of the industry under duress, with limited trade and sales taking place. I know of a few people. There's just been a diamond tender in Suriname of people selling goods there into India effectively. The diamond bourses in Belgium or Antwerp are now going to be staying open through the summer so that they can trade anything that is available to trade. But my view, and it's I think pretty universal, it's going to be a very tough year with not a whole lot going on, and we'll only see, I guess, a sustainable uptick in late 2020, early 21. But again, I guess there's a qualifier here. If we see more phases of COVID spurting up, or second or third waves, it could impact here. But this is an old industry. It's been very resilient over a long period of time. It's seen two Great Depressions. It's seen the Great Depression, 2 world wars, the US recession. People don't realize actually how tough this was for De Beers back in 81, 82. It's very interesting to go and look at what happened in the market here. It was a time we didn't have all this public media and social media. But man, that was a challenging period for De Beers as well. We had the global financial crash. We've seen that on the graph, and we've obviously had other setbacks. So the industry will emerge. It'll be stronger, more efficient, much leaner, and more technology driven. Already we're seeing a lot of people, and De Beers are doing it interestingly. They have the precedent of Okavango Diamond Company selling diamonds, small diamonds on the internet, rough stones. So, you know, there's already good progress being made on selling rough diamonds through the internet. Obviously, polished stones have been sold that way for a long time. So it will emerge stronger. And the only risk, or the other risk for me, is actually just the ongoing, you know, decline of natural production anyway. So, you know, that opens the door for more and more synthetics. So that's me. This is a news flash, David, after if you're there, you know, where did this diamond come from? I don't know if you've seen it yet. And thanks very much. I'm open to questions, and sorry about the hiccup along the way.
Thank you very, very much, John. That was most interesting, guys. We've got a little bit of time here for quick questions and answers. Just unmute yourself, put your video on, and fire away.
Interesting, John. Thanks.
Pleasure. Sorry, it got extended.
What's your source for the Marangi diamonds? What do you believe? Where do you believe they came from?
Well, is Mike DeVitt or John Ward on the talk? I mean, John in particular has done some really good work there. There's one of the local geologists, I think, on the call. But I think they're an old, you know, marine or edge of a lake deposit, and it's a very well sorted population, Gordon. I mean, all of those diamonds are typically, you know, around the two carats. And they got stuck in the, you know, the Nkomda. And again, if you look at where the diamonds are left today, I mean, man, it's really hard conglomerate. You know, if you're going to drill and blast that stuff, you're going to break most of those diamonds. So I think it's an old marine deposit that was, you know, caught up in a metamorphic belt, and then through uplift and erosion, you eroded out and weathered a lot of the material, and that's where the easy stuff was recovered from. But if John or anyone else...
Breaking transmission, I showed that I had been to Marangi as part of a Geological Society of Zimbabwe visit. And
2014.
Correct. And Chimani Mani, where the Russians had an operation. So offline, I'll put that image back up to you. We can have a quick chat about those things later on.
Yeah, great. Look forward.
If you want to comment on it, I'm prepared to give a comment.
Yeah, John.
John Ward, yeah. Now, I think the traditional view, you know, John and the others, is that the Marangi stones have been well travelled and come a long way. I don't subscribe to that. I think there's a much more closer source which has already been discovered, was discovered by De Beers in 1997, actually 4 years ahead of the discovery of the conglomerate. And so I think that and because of the metamorphism there, both the conglomerates and the Kimberlites have actually been heavily altered. And that makes it a little bit more of a challenge to understand that. But the Chimani Mani ones, which are the ones that Gordon was talking about earlier, that's a more distal portion of the basin. The Marangi stones themselves are pretty much close to the old shoreline of the Mkondo Basin, sitting right on the edge of the craton, very stable, then going off into a fallen basin, which is what Charleswood is, where it's been scrunched up again by the Chimani Mani uplift. And what we found there is that the stone size is much smaller and also better quality than Marangi. Incidentally, John, the average stone size is actually double what I'm giving there, 2 carats a stone. It's actually closer to 5 on the margin itself. And that then tails off very gradually into the basin itself. And then there's a lot of faulting. So you lose the connection between Charleswood and Marangi because of the faulting associated with the Salvi Rift. It's a very interesting population. There's not much else that goes with it in terms of indicators or classes, not like the Orange River, which has got, banded ironstones and agates and all that sort of thing. It's mostly quartz and diamond, really. It's a very unusual.
But I mean, John, you're still saying it's got an alluvial type setting, or
solely alluvial, John. Yeah, there's a fluvial input on the southeastern side, which comes from that Wengezi Chikara Kimberlites. We actually did some work on that in 2014. And then the main deposit comes from further northwest of that. So there are two inputs that we can recognize into that portion of the basin, and then that feeds in deeper into the main Mkonda basin. So the units in Charleswood, where Gordon and them went, are actually naturally confined, thin conglomerates inside a more finer sediment, sandstone and shale. Whereas the Marangi itself, the shoreline, is in a conglomerate, which is mostly less than 2 meters thick. In fact, most of the stones are within half a meter of the basal contact. But the grades are stunning. I mean, the grades are 50 to 80 carats a ton on that edge. It's really very impressive. Very stressed, and you're right. When they into the conglomerate now, all the weathered out alluvials have been pretty much mined out. Now they were mined out by 2015 and 2016 taking off. So most of the value is sitting in the dumps, and in the hard rock, it's the most stressed diamonds that I've seen naturally. So that on liberation, you see a breakage factor, which is very high.
What would you describe the radioactivity to that has altered them?
Metamorphism. The Chumani belt, the Grenvillian, on that, the age of this is 1,105. Well, that's the age of the dolerites that are part of the Mkondo volcanics that cut it. So it's older than that. And I would say that the source is about the same age as Cullinan itself, around about 1,200, 1,250 thereabouts.
Okay. Yeah, Gordon, I mean, you'd have seen diamonds at the Wits, which also, I guess are showing metamorphism, radioactive damage.
Thank you very much, Dave. Apta, you had a question?
Henny, I was just going to respond to John about that big diamond in the back of your truck. I think it's a meteorite, John.
No, we're waiting for you to figure out where it comes from, Dave. It's one of those big white stones.
Yeah.
No, just kidding.
Okay, guys, thank you very, very much. I think if that's all then for now, we've got a recording of this. It's not going to be on the cloud for a long time, so if you'd like to listen again, do so within the next 10 days or so.
And people are welcome to the presentation. I'll send you a compressed PowerPoint, and we can distribute that as well, Henny.
Thank you very much.
John, that's great.
Mucho gracias, baie dankie, and cool, and thank you very much.
Have a good day.
Adrian.
Cheers, guys.
Bye now.
Cheers.